Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to join you all. I'm really thrilled to have this discussion with some powerhouses in our community right here in Las Vegas. I'm joined this evening by Leslie Turner, the Justice Director for the Mass Liberation Project, Nevada. I'm also joined by Judge Belinda T. Harris of the North Las Vegas Justice Court, Department 3. I'm joined by John Piro, the Clark County Chief Deputy Public Defender, and finally, Mr. Robert Langford, criminal defense attorney and civil rights lawyer and former Clark County Deputy District Attorney. And our special guest joining us on the panel tonight is Candace Mckinley, lead organizer for the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund. Welcome, esteemed panelists. I'm really thrilled to have this discussion with you all tonight. How's everybody doing?
Good, thank you, Quentin.
Fantastic. I was very inspired by what I saw in the Philly D.A. screening, and it really resonated with me. As we all know, the criminal justice landscape and the culture of criminal justice in this country. I want to just dive right in and ask about, well, let's start with an audience question. One of the first audience questions that came in was, is something like this possible in Clark County? Let's talk about that a little bit. And I would like to direct that question to Mr. Langford. I think that's appropriate.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, absolutely it is. There are some structural limitations in that the DA, the newly elected DA in Clark County, could not go in and clean house, as they said in the show, because there's a DA union. There's also a public defender union, but the DA union would prevent the newly elected DA from doing that. And so, I mean, there are other ways that you could try to turn the ship, but that would not be one of them.
Sure. What say you, John?
Quentin, I think it's not only possible, I think it's probable. And I think the wheels are turning to make that happen. I think people in Clark County are desperate for change. And I think that this next election is going to show that. And I think Leslie Turner should be able to jump in here and talk about putting wheels in motion and boots on the ground to make sure that Steve Wolfson doesn't see another term in office.
Well, Leslie, I think this is a good entry point for you, sister.
Yeah, so I think that, we tried to do this here in Las Vegas, in Clark County. We tried to elect a progressive DA. And I think that, we're going to try it again. And I think that it's really important that the community gets deeper engaged and really takes the time to reflect on the power of the district attorney and how that, impacts our daily lives and how that impacts the people that live in our communities that we see that are in these courtrooms every single day. I think we need to be realistic about that. And we need to also think about how that position as the head DA, the elected DA, how that position flows into other parts of government, such as like the legislature, and like what that means for criminal justice reform and what that means when we're trying to create policies that positively impact our community.
I hear that. I hear that. Judge Harris, can you share a little bit of insight as to the feasibility of this? Before you were a judge, you were also a public defender, and you had to go before the DA. Is it possible to have what we saw happen in Philly D.A. happen here in Clark County?
I do believe so. I always have said that I believe that hope dies last. And I do believe, I echo what John Piro said. I do believe that it's extremely possible. I think that Clark County is ready for change. Just for an example, we just had a big election here in 2020. In 2020, there were numerous women and men who were public defenders who put their names on the ballot. That was the first time in Clark County's history that ever happened, that a bunch of public defenders actually went down and put their name on the ballot. A majority of those public defenders won their elections. A lot of those public defenders are women of color. There were more women of color on this ballot in 2020 here in Clark County than we have ever seen before. I am actually the first Black judge in North Las Vegas. North Las Vegas has never had a Black judge before, and the people elected me in. My campaign was extremely grassroots. We were definitely boots on the ground. And it was in the midst of a pandemic, several pandemics, right? One of a deadly virus that we could not see, and also one of civil unrest and unjust, where people were extremely uncomfortable in having conversations that they were never had to have before, and seeing things on television and Facebook and things like that that they never had to see before. So I do believe that something of this nature is happening. I already believe that the bench has been balanced. I mean, it's not perfect. The system will never be perfect, but I do think that the bench has been balanced a little bit. There is just as many defense counsels / public defenders as former defense counsel public defenders as there were prosecutors, because on our bench here in Clark County, there were several more prosecutors than anything, or civil practitioners. So I do think that the bench has already been being balanced. As Leslie said, it's all come together. It's all woven together. It's a big basket. So I do think that something like this could happen. I do think that we are all ready for change, that there is the term progressive is fine, but I like to look at it as forward thinking, because as society evolves, we can only go forward. We should not be going backwards. We should only be going forward. So I say that we are forward thinking and what we want to do and want our society to look like. And so I do believe that change is coming, and things will be different. And, I think that is something that Clark County is ready for.
And Quentin, if I may, because I don't think the judge highlighted this enough, it took until 2020 for North Las Vegas, a majority minority community, to have its first Black judge.
That's definitely important to lift up, John. Thank you for sure.
Family court, first Black judge, Deidre Butler. District court, first Latina judge elected to the bench outright without first being appointed, Monica Trujillo. So I think Clark County is ready for change, and I think 2020 was foreshadowing that.
That's a good segue.
Can I say one thing too?
Sorry. Go for it.
Is that I really think that Clark County has been shifting for a while. The demographics have been changing. And I think that the community is, they're more engaged and they're fired up around criminal justice related issues. And we saw that back with Robert Langford's campaign, where, within 5 weeks, we came in within striking distance of Steve Wolfson. Yeah. We made him spend almost all of his money in his campaign trail. And, he really had to defend himself. And, that was really the kind of credibility of the candidate. And it was also the power of the community saying that, enough is enough. We want a different orientation. We want a different culture when it comes to the criminal justice system. And it also was kind of the community being unlocked and learning about this role and what it means to, like, hey, you know what? We do need to start talking about the DA, and we do need to get in there and change things. So there's a lot of different pieces to it, but I think that the political ecosystem in Clark County is shifting and has shifted, and we're going to see that more and more and more, and we're going to get more and more pushback. We're going to get more and more people, like Steve Wolfson saying that, there's a problem when we're seeing all these Black women or all these women of color getting elected on the bench. We need to take a look at the way we're doing that now. And so I think that speaks for itself.
And Quentin, if I could put a pause there, I think a large part of that comes from Leslie Turner, boots on the ground, and Laura Martin, boots on the ground, making that happen and pushing that shift. So we have to give credit where credit is due there as well.
While we're in that vein, because Leslie made a point to talk about the education, right? And I wanted to ask, how important is it for us to be educating the importance of the role of the DA? We all talk about president, we talk about US Senate, even though a lot of us don't, typically understand what a US Senator does or any of those other high level elected offices. But the local offices, the ones that can impact your life tomorrow, we tend to fall off the ballot there. Can we talk a little bit about the importance of understanding the office? And I want to start with Judge Harris, because I feel like you did a great job in your campaign about making people understand the importance of the role of the judge. Let's talk about the importance of the role of all judicial officials, including the DA. I'll start with you, Judge.
And I do think that's important. I mean, education is key. I know that's like a little cliche, but the more you know, the better you do, and the better you do, the more you can know. So I do think that all of these local roles are important. And I did in my election, every time I said something, I would end with local elections matter, because they do. Local elections are where they deal with your everyday life. Your traffic ticket, which could go into warrant, which then now suspends your insurance, which suspends your driver's license, to now you are scared to drive to work or do what you need to do. That comes before the justice of the peace, right? So you are more likely to interact with the justice of the peace or your local police officer than you are your president, your congressman, even maybe your assemblyman, right? So these things are very important to have this education. And I do think that the community is getting unlocked and learning more about it, more civics lessons, if you will, having these very conversations and making sure that people understand exactly what's going on within your local community. Because the president is important, Washington, D.C. is important, the congressman is important. But how I was raised is you have to take care of home before you can go and help somebody else. And so home deals with your local. And if you don't understand your local, then it doesn't matter who's really at the top. So my name in 2020 was the last name on the ballot if you lived in North Las Vegas. So my other saying was start from the bottom, right? Because when you are climbing a ladder, you don't start at the top of the ladder, right? You start at the bottom of the ladder to climb up to get to the top. And your local elections are at the bottom of the ladder. But if we're just trying to get to the top of the ladder, then we're not going to understand how to get to the top of the ladder appropriately with the appropriate people to make sure that we are moving forward in our society as a collective. So with that being said, I do think that it's extremely important to know the roles, what the roles do, the discretion that they have, and how they can affect your everyday life. Side note, people are always saying, well, I'm a law-abiding citizen, I don't get in trouble. But that example of a parking ticket, or a traffic ticket, everybody could get a traffic ticket. Everybody could be accused of speeding or failing to yell at the red light or something of that nature, right? And you would not deem that as being criminal. Most people don't deem that as being criminal. Well, here in Nevada, traffic offenses are misdemeanor convictions. I don't know if many people know that, but they are misdemeanor convictions, which means then you have an IE criminal record. And so you have to understand that, and that's something that's local. And people are like, oh, it's no big thing. But if you plead to that speeding ticket, they report it to your insurance. Now your insurance is going up, right? That's more money coming out of your household. All of these things have a revolving door. So it's extremely important, because something as little as a traffic ticket could totally spiral out of control and really have an impact on your life. So I think it's extremely important to know the roles that are happening locally.
Absolutely. I want to bring Candace in on that same question, because Candace was boots on the ground during Mr. Krasner's first campaign. And I want to ask what was your experience with educating community members about the role and the importance of the DA's race?
Yeah, my role was very limited. There were some people who were very, very, very involved in the campaign, but I was organizing with a group which we couldn't endorse a candidate, and so we took it as a role of we held a political forum that was also aired on a local radio channel that had a really large listenership of Black people, especially a lot of Black voters who might have been older, that are usually out of the reach of groups like Black Lives Matter and other activist groups. And the forum was well attended, and it was for judicial candidates as well as all the DA candidates. And so our thing was just like, okay, we're going to educate people to let them know what other powers that these elected officials have, because in Philadelphia, all judges are elected, as well as the DA, like what can they do? And then having a forum where, they are able to answer and submit questions in long form before the forum that are made public that everyone can read. but then also ask questions at the forum in a very sort of limited fashion that gave a lot of ground for the public to do a lot of the talking and have the candidates do some listening and very specific in their answers. And so that was our goal, just like being able to like put the candidates in front of as many people as possible. And so Black Lives Matter Philly did this, and a lot of different organizing groups in the city did this as well. And we were sort of coordinated to make sure that we were able to get in front of as many Philadelphians as possible.
That's thank you for sharing that insight.
Can I say something on piggyback for that? I think in 2020, that also happened here in Clark County, so much so that the Review Journal, which is one of our biggest publications here in Clark County, actually did debates, and they uploaded them where you could watch them on the cable channel. They were available on YouTube. They were on their website. So I think that in 2020, that was something that was happening with a lot of, like I said, I know the Review Journal, that was the first time they had ever done that here in Clark County. And I know there was a bunch of other organizations that also held a lot of panels and putting candidates in front of as many people as possible. Also happened here in Clark County. And I'm hopeful that that will continue with the organizations, with the local newspapers and things like that, because that is important to be able to have different groups of different opinions, put candidates before different people so people could have informed decisions.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Oh, I wanted to just add something too, that we, during the DA's race, we specifically had a community meeting just about the power of the DA. And so when we were talking about the problems that we see in our community all the time, such as police violence, it's important that the community understands, you know, the DA has the power to indict those officers. And so that, like, for instance, earlier today, I was at a rally for Jorge Gomez, who was killed by law enforcement on June 1st of last year during a Black Lives Matter protest. And it's like, the community has to understand, he has the power there. He has the power to hold officers accountable. So when we're thinking in terms of the things that we see all the time in our communities, we need to understand that the DA is actually who has the power to do something about it. And then also during this last election cycle, we hosted our own, Power of Justice 2, which was on our Mass Liberation website. And that was like a time for us to just ask the questions that we want to ask in the way that we want to ask them to the candidates, and have them just have real candid conversations about the things that we know to be true, that we see every day. Because a lot of the times, you know, our narrative is given to us, even though we know it doesn't happen like that. It doesn't, you know, that's not the way things go down in our community every day. So when we want to talk about public safety, yeah, we don't feel safe when we see police cars every other minute passing by. That doesn't actually make us feel safe. So really speaking on public safety and asking those questions from our perspective on our own platforms, I think was also really powerful.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you a lot. I want to bring in Mr. Langford for this question that we got from an audience member. What is the difficulty with getting forward-thinking DAs and judges elected in Clark County? Does it primarily boil down to being outfunded, or are there other difficulties to focus on and address?
I think the greatest difficulty is educating the voters about the significance of the office of DA. And Leslie was talking about that a minute ago. Traditionally, the white, middle-aged DA candidates would love to go out and say, I am the chief law enforcement officer of Clark County, and just sort of mouth those words. But in fact, that's the truth. As Leslie said, you have the power to prosecute police officers. You have the power to call the shots in the juvenile justice system, the power to call the shots in domestic violence, and understanding or making the voters understand that the chief law enforcement officer, and it's not just Wolfson, it's been decades, it's the model of the district attorney that is typical around the country. We are losing the battle of domestic violence. Domestic violence. We arrest more men and women for that crime now than we ever have before, and it's not changing. We're incarcerating people, and that's not changing. You can arrest, prosecute, and incarcerate to where you got everybody in jail. And guess what? You're not solving the problem of crime. We're not solving those problems. We're just locking people up. And until you make people understand that, of all political persuasions, until you teach people that that's, Larry Krasner said it, right? We're going to be about smart prosecution, is what he said. We're going to change the way we think about prosecution. We're going to change the way other people think about prosecution. We need to change the way police officers think about prosecution and whether or not putting someone in jail is actually a good thing. That is the most important thing that you can do to get people to understand that this is a radical idea, but it's as radical as arithmetic. If you keep doing the same thing over and over, right, and it's not changing anything, that's the definition of insanity. And we are insane in this country. And until we get people to wake up to that notion, and people will. You start talking numbers like, do you know how much it costs to keep somebody in prison? Well, I have no idea. And then you tell them what it is, and you multiply that times the number of people we put in prison and the growth rate of putting people in prison. And all of a sudden you've got their attention.
Yeah.
So I think that educating the public about what the office of district attorney really is critical to making change.
Absolutely. Mr. Piro, I would ask you the same questions. What do you think is the greatest difficulty in getting forward-thinking DAs and judges in Clark County?
Quentin, I think it's going to be a culture change. And I like that Robert used the word radical. It's going to take radical change to undo decades of oppressive policies that were rooted in a racist past. And the problem with that, when I say that, is a lot of white people get uncomfortable when I talk about the racist past that we've dealt with as a country. And the thing is, we need to get uncomfortable. We need to talk about things because you cannot have reconciliation without truth first. It's a sequential process. You have to have truth, and then you can have reconciliation. And that's where we're going to start moving forward with things. And I think it's possible, as Judge Harris said, grassroots campaigns led and fought. I think, unfortunately for Mr. Langford, we were just one election shy of changing things in that direction as well, because all of those women that ran against well-funded country club opponents, of which Steve Wolfson is a part. He spent $600,000 on that election to beat Robert Langford in a primary. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about fighting against culture. One of the things from this movie that kind of hit home for me was watching him face that culture, watching Larry Krasner face that culture. That juvenile district attorney thought she was doing good work, when really she was punishing kids. And there are DAs in that office that think they are doing good work, and they are punishing kids at alarming rates. So there's a culture change that needs to happen.
Yeah. Did anyone else want to add to that question? Because I want to go into culture next, but I want to give space if there's any other conversation around why we think there's an impediment to having forward-thinking judges and DAs.
Can I just say real quick to follow up on something that John said about, there are DAs who think they are doing good work. They really are, and they're sincere and they're good-hearted people, just as doctors in medieval times who put leeches on people thought they were really helping the patient, right? And not understanding that today there's all sorts of other academic scholarship that shows how badly we are hurting people through the misuse of the juvenile justice system. That's all.
And the honesty of it, Quentin, is we have to talk seriously. Nevada is one of the jurisdictions that incarcerates people the most. Prior to the passage of AB 236 last session, which was the most comprehensive criminal justice reform we've had in the state in 30 years, we were trending higher than Louisiana. So we were trending in a really bad direction. And we need to talk honestly about it, because the United States leads all developed countries in mass incarceration and people under supervision. So either Americans are more immoral than every other person in the world, which I do not think we are, or we've been doing things seriously wrong and broken, and we need to talk about that. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's what the criminal justice system has been used for, to hammer people and call them the other. We call them others, these super predators, when we use that term back in the 90s, right? To make people feel scared and make them feel like the other, and it's separateness between me and this person. It's that person, they're the problem. But really, the way we've been doing things is the problem, and it's time for a deep dive into change.
And for greater context, to add to what John was saying, we incarcerate the most people in the world while only having 5% of the world's population, right? So that really blows my mind. And when I saw that statistic in the documentary or in the screening, it just floored me even more. That was a statistic that was also featured in Michelle Alexander's book. But every time I see it, it blows my mind, because at some point we should be smart enough to say, okay, well, wait, maybe we should do something a little different. I was taken with the cultural components when Mr. Krasner took office, because to me, it felt like it resonated across political spectrum in all offices. He came in with promises, he came in hard. You saw folks getting let go on the Snow Day massacre. That tickled me. But I want to talk about, can you have a transformative candidate if the institution's culture is toxic? I'll start with you, Judge Harris.
I do believe that you can do that. I do believe you can do that. I have seen it happen, but it does get extremely hard on the candidate. It gets lonely on the candidate, but it can happen, and it can affect your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, and your financial health. But I do think that it could happen. I do think that it could happen, because this work is not for the faint heart or the lighthearted. It's just not. But I do think it can be, because as we always talk about, at least you have the seat at the table, and at least you can have these conversations. Just recently, I've only been on my new job, less than 6 months. And just recently, I was faced with an issue where I was feeling extremely defeated and feeling a little hopeless and thinking, what did I get myself into in this job? Because I'm not going to make it, because it's just me, and I'm really trying to do some things. And I had to call on another vet. I call her, she's a vet judge who I know has been in the trenches and who has been the only one for an extremely long time. And she gave me some tips and some pointers, and she really relit my fuel where I'm going to be able to keep going. So I do think that it is able to happen, but none of us really like change, me included, right? When I go to a restaurant, a lot of times I order the same thing I always have eaten at that restaurant, right? That's why
it's gonna be good.
Exactly. I know it's good. I know they're gonna cook it the way I want it cooked, and I'm not going to have any complaints. I don't want to veer off the menu. I don't want to try anything new. This is why I'm here, to get this particular thing. But I think that once your friend is there and they're eating something that you've seen, and I say, Quentin, can I have a taste of your fish? And you say, sure, Judge, and then it's good. Then the next time I go there, I probably may get the fish, right? And so I think that's how we have to look at this culture. I think that having the seat at the table and being able to have these conversations, one of the things that I loved in watching the screening was there was a new prosecutor there, and she was saying to another prosecutor there, like, I really like talking to you. And she said, well, what you should have is you should have a little empathy to the person who you're speaking to, because she does think that she's doing good work. she does think in her genuine heart that she's doing good work. And you're coming in here basically, excuse my lack of words, telling her you ain't been doing it. You suck. And so you
For
need
30 years.
Right. For 20 years, you just suck. You ain't, and you suck, and that approach was like, it shocked her. She said, maybe you should listen to her and understand where she's coming from, and let's be able to have this dialogue. And I appreciated that, because BTH is bold, tough, and honest. So that's kind of sometimes the approach that I have, like, you ain't shit and you suck and this is how it should be done. But I've had to channel that back being on the bench, right? So I can see the different perspectives and understand where people are coming from, which allows me to have these type of conversations, which allows change to then happen, right? Because not only am I seeing their perspective, they're also seeing my perspective. Mm-hmm. And so when we're able to have those conversations, then we are now in relationship. And once we get into this relationship, we can move forward in our relationship and understanding that maybe everything that I'm saying is not right, but maybe it's not wrong either. Maybe it's just different. And different doesn't mean wrong. And different doesn't mean that you suck and you haven't been doing great things. Maybe it's just different. And just because it's different doesn't mean that, it's wrong and that we can't move forward together. So I think that we definitely can do that, but we have to make sure that we have these seats at the tables, that we have these conversations, because nobody is perfect. And just speaking with Leslie, nobody is perfect and nobody should be held to the standard of perfection. However, we have to be able to have these bold, tough, and honest conversations, right? Because they are uncomfortable, and they're uncomfortable for everybody. Because the person who's saying that you suck probably doesn't want to say that, and the person who's hearing that doesn't want to hear that. So two people are already at odds. So I think that when you become in this relationship and you're able to see all perspectives and get the information, that we will be able to do that. And I also think we do have to look at the past, and we do have to go to the people who have been doing the work. I've had to rely on some judges who have already been doing the work. Yes, I know they're tired, but I rely on them because they've been there. I don't know everything, right? When you start something new, you're still learning it. It's kind of like a kid or a child, right? You crawl, then you try to walk and you stumble, then you start walking, then you start running, then maybe you start sprinting. And so then you can learn to swim. It's this progression that we need to have to move forward. So I do think that we'll be able to get there. I just think that this has to happen. And really, nobody wants this to happen because it's not fun. It's just not fun.
Yeah. Well, not is it just not fun, but families are still suffering, right?
Correct.
So you don't get that
contact. And that's why it makes it not fun, because it's actual lives, it's actual real things, it's actual conversations. And we know as people, we only like or care about stuff that is applicable to us, right? And so nobody wants to have this tough conversation about this family suffering, because now this makes me uncomfortable. And if we're keeping it real, somewhat guilty, there's that survivor's guilt, right? Of I'm in my comfort and that doesn't happen to me. And I'm sorry that's happening to you, but that's not my story. And so we do have to have this conversation. I tell people all the time, I am a system actor. And I'm a Black woman. And if we look in our past, the Constitution, from being Black and a woman, never looked at me as a person. Yeah. It just didn't. I was property as a Black person, and as a woman, I was also still property to your mate, to your husband. But I am a system actor, and I withhold that Constitution because, like I said before, I do believe that hope dies last. So I do think it can happen.
I want to ask that question to Leslie.
Hey, so I think that, well, first of all, when we put kind of like our candidates into positions of power within the system, yes, we can see kind of like some change in the kind of material conditions of the people who are caught up in the system right now. But we cannot put all of our eggs in that one basket to say, okay, that's all we need to do is we just need to elect, you know, more Belindas and more Johns and more progressive DAs. And like, that's not going to actually give us or deliver the type of justice that we're actually really seeking. And it kind of goes to Robert's point earlier, is that we're constantly in this hamster wheel where we're just reacting. We're constantly just reacting to things that are happening, reacting to, you know, somebody was murdered. We're reacting because, you know, somebody had a gun, and we're never actually getting to the root cause of what brought us there. So in order for us to do that, that's going to require organizing outside of systems and building up our own sustainable solutions, our own ways of addressing harm, our own ways of looking at punishment, our own ways of providing for our community and making sure that people can live in abundance and thrive. Because as we know, poverty is a driver of criminality, or if that's what you want to call it. So I think that it's, I'm not going to say it's like not helpful, because I have seen it help current situations. But I just want to be clear that that is, you know, the whole damn system is guilty as hell, basically. And so the whole system needs to be abolished, and we need to create something new. We need to have a whole new a whole shift in society, but that happens over time. So I think, yes, having, you know, having our people at the table, having our people in positions of power within these systems will improve conditions. But, you know, we have to always be looking past that and further than that and deeper than that and wider than that, if we're actually going to bring real change for future generations. And really shift society in a real way.
Yeah, that's very insightful. I want to pose the same question to John.
I think it bears mentioning that, like Leslie said, it's one piece of the puzzle in a multifaceted thing. So it's one piece of the puzzle. Will it make a difference? I do think it will make a difference, but I think there's other pieces of the puzzle that need to be put into place as well. And what we've done historically as a society, and especially here in Las Vegas and Nevada, which I think is important to mention to the Vegas PBS watchers, is that we have used the criminal justice system as a hammer to solve all of our problems. We don't adequately fund our schools. We don't adequately fund mental health care. We don't adequately fund drug treatment centers. So what we see a lot as a public defender here is people with untreated mental illness winding up in the criminal justice system. And that's a very expensive place to fix a problem that should have been available for solving a long time ago. Or treating the drug epidemic, instead of treating it like a public health crisis, we treat it as a moral failing and try to use the criminal justice system. A phrase that I like to say is mental illness is not a flaw in character, it's a flaw in chemistry. And we need to start treating people appropriately and getting them treatment before they wind up in the criminal justice system. I can tell you that it costs $190 a day to house somebody in the Clark County Detention Center. It costs $25,000 a year to house somebody in the prison. And that's if they're healthy. If they're unhealthy and you have to get their medications and treat their health, it costs us even more money. And then people come out no better. So we're not getting any results from this incarceration system. Like Robert said, we cannot incarcerate our way out of our problems. We have to deal with them head on. And getting a progressive DA in place or a forward-thinking DA in place is just one piece of that puzzle. Somebody who can recognize that the reason and the way we've been doing things is not correct. The system always likes to point a finger and say, why did you do what you did? But now that we're learning with trauma-informed care, that's not the correct question.
Right.
Like Leslie said, the correct question is, what brought you here to this point? That's the correct question. And when you ask better questions, you're going to get better results. And what we haven't been doing for a long time is asking better questions.
And, you know, John, that's such a common sense approach that it blows my mind that in the year of Beyonce's internet, 2021, we still aren't asking the most obvious questions. I have a question from one of our community members.
Just remember, Mr. Quentin, common sense ain't that common.
Well, now I'm gonna have to cash app you my tithes and offering, Judge. See, we have a question from one of our community members, and I would like to start with Mr. Langford. What are the 3 big issues with the Clark County DA's office, and what would you propose to fix those issues? What would your suggestions be?
Just so we're clear, I'm not running for that office.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to propose this for the next elected DA. You know, I think that fundamentally, we need to adjust how we look at criminal justice in terms of we have one response, and that is punishment. Mm-hmm. That goes from the juvenile justice system on up. You heard him in the show talking about, well, we're gonna call it this. I don't care what you call it, it still ends up, and we got one reaction, and that's we're gonna punish them somehow. Whether it's taking them out of school and programming them a certain way, whatever it is. I think that the 3 biggest issues are juvenile justice. You have to start with juveniles and giving them justice. That is how you stop the school to prison pipeline. We create adult felons in grade school. That's where we do it. And that's because when they get into that system, they're not given justice. And justice should put them at a better place when they come out of it than they were when they went into it. And that doesn't mean taking them away from their family. Secondly, we are absolutely fundamentally losing the war on domestic violence. I think that starting with domestic violence, you teach a whole new, again, if you take that punishment component out of it, and you talk about restoration of relationships, restoration of a person's self-worth and dignity, that has, I say that the people who come to me, my clients who come to me charged with that crime, those people are not criminals for the most part. They're just normal people who got into a bad relationship, allowed their relationship to deteriorate. We've got to teach restoration, not punishment. And so that's an amazing place to do it, because there are so many average people that are involved in that system. And Nevada leads the country in domestic homicide. So that's number 3, or number 2. Number 3, bail reform. You know, we got this great law, Valdez, Jimenez, you know, you can go in and ask, and the judges look at it and say, $25,000 or $10,000, whatever it is. There's still no, and I don't blame the judge. I absolutely don't blame the judge. We've got to, at the legislative level, change that. You say, well, wait a minute, this is for the DA. Yes. If the DA goes to the legislature and say, this system is horrible and we've got to change it, the legislature's got to do it, and we need at some point to change the Nevada Constitution. But you know who should start that? The Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Clark County, the largest county in the state. That's 3.
Yeah. You know, I appreciate that you lifted up the juvenile justice piece, because in the screening, it was the woman who was the director of the juvenile justice unit, and she was one of the folks who said, you know, I feel like I'm doing the right thing. And I wrote her words down exactly. She said, if a kid is selling drugs, a kid is selling drugs. And, you know, I have not been known to be the most nuanced person, but when I heard her say that, I was like, well, where is the nuance? Because I know there are kids out there who are probably taking to doing things that they otherwise wouldn't have to do if they didn't have to take care of their families, right? We don't know what type of economic circumstances these families are facing. We do know that the current economic structure of this country doesn't lend itself to the success of Black, Brown, Indigenous people, even though it has been our work that has built this country up. So I just felt like it was a little disingenuous to suggest that she was doing the best she could for this particular kid without having any nuance or considering the full humanness of that kid. So thank you for lifting up that important component of it. John, I want to ask you the same thing. What are the top 3 issues with the Clark County DA's office, and what would you propose to fix them?
Okay, so Robert isn't wrong, but I'm going to go in a little bit different track. I will start first agreeing with Robert that bail reform is a major issue. I get lucky enough to lobby the legislature as part of my duties in the public defender's office. And this is my 3rd session now. 6 years I've been trying to work on bail reform. It failed in 2017. In 2019, it failed. We tried to push a bill forward and it got whittled away so much by DAs pushing against it that it wasn't really bail reform. So we couldn't send it to the governor's desk because we would have been doing a disservice to the community having that bill signed and having anybody say it was bail reform. And that comes in large part in working with Leslie Turner in the community to focus on doing no harm. We are now in this legislative session, and again, bail reform is being whittled down. As Mr. Langford said, we had to go to the Supreme. After we lost our effort in bail reform in the legislature in 2019, attorneys from our office, including one Judge Belinda T. Harris, Nancy Lemke, Christy Craig, took a case up to the Nevada Supreme Court and fought for bail reform. And you know what the prosecutor said from the Clark County District Attorney's Office? He said this was a pet project by some attorneys. That's what he thinks about bail reform. So bail reform is a big issue. I see your eyes getting big, Quentin, but those are the words of the prosecutor in this county. It's a pet project, keeping poor people in jail for long periods of time because they're too poor to afford release. And so we got a ruling from the Supreme Court. And guess what the district attorneys are trying to do this session in the legislature? Whittle that decision away. And so we're fighting against that right now, and we're not going to let that happen. So that's number 1, bail reform, and actually following bail reform, not keeping people in jail because they're too poor to get out of jail. The second thing I will tell you about, and this is a big one, is the death penalty, Quentin. I don't know if you know this, and forgive me if you already do, but Nevada is number 9 in the nation, even ahead of the federal government with people on death row. Steve Wolfson came in and claimed he was better than the previous guy, David Roger, who was really bad. You know what the number 2 counties are for death penalty seeking? You got Riverside County, California, and you got Clark County, Nevada. Steve Wolfson has filed 90 death penalty cases over the course of his administration. The death penalty has made us no better and no safer. And right now there's another bill at the legislature seeking to abolish the racist, tyrannical, crummy process that is the death penalty. And guess what they're doing? They're opposing that effort as well. Super hardcore. So that's another issue. And one that I want to bring up to the forefront because Nevada has had its own innocence cases. Quentin, nationally, 1 in 9 people that get sentenced to death row are innocent. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't get on a plane if 1 in 10 planes were going to crash. No. I wouldn't fly no more. But here we are, and then Nevada's no different. Fred Steese, the district attorney, sought his death. Prosecutors hid evidence. He was innocent. Recently released, and the state of Nevada just had to pay out a bunch of money. Not the prosecutors that withheld evidence and convicted him. Us, the taxpayers, had to pay money, which they should, because we never should have took that many years away from that man's life. Kathy Woods in Northern Nevada, a mentally ill woman that police coerced a false confession out of, innocent, removed. Kirsten Lobato, a young woman from Panaca, who again, prosecutors sought to prosecute her for death, for murder, innocent, removed, out of prison now. And DeMarlo Berry, super nice man, probably the gentlest man you'll ever meet in your life. Falsely accused of a murder robbery. They sought the death penalty initially. Innocent, spent years of his life away. Didn't get a chance to have kids like he wanted to, didn't get a chance to live his life. These are things that have happened in Nevada. So the death penalty is a major issue here that needs to be dealt with. And Steve Wolfson right now, in a political stunt, is putting his foot on the gas, trying to press for an execution when we haven't had one in years. But right now that the death penalty abolition bill is up, he decided this is the best time to seek an execution warrant. And then lastly, there's a conviction culture, Quentin. Wolfson came in, said he was going to take that away, but there's still prosecutors that say to us when we're working on cases, well, I need that felony conviction. So it's not focused on what's best for the community, it's focused on what's best for a career. And that's an untenable position and a bad culture place to be. So death penalty, bail reform, conviction culture.
Those all seem incredibly infrastructural and major. And again, it makes you wonder, why haven't these things already been done? When you name those names, it breaks my heart to hear that real lives, because I guess it just puts into perspective the real lives that are impacted by failed policy and failed systems. Leslie, I want to ask this question to you because you are also boots on the ground. You're one of the best organizers I know. Tell me what you think are the top 3 or biggest 3 issues coming out of the Clark County DA's office, and what are some proposed solutions?
First of all, just like everything John and Robert said, thank y'all for, laying the foundation for me to kind of piggyback on. And I think number 1 for me is police accountability. Black and brown people being killed by the police. We have right now legislation around police accountability that, again, is getting watered down by the DA lobbyists. And you have people that work for Metro like Chuck Calloway that get in public comment and say, we've killed 19 people and only 4 of them are Black, as if that is a justification for the fact that you're killing citizens. And I've said this numerous times during public comment, is because someone's killed by law enforcement, because it can be justified via policy, because it can fit into the framework of your policy for your department, does not make it justified in broader society. Nobody should be losing their life at the hands of law enforcement. And if that happens, then your policy is a failure. Your policy has a gap where somebody can be justifiably killed. And I think, I've unfortunately seen tapes here from Las Vegas over the summer of people being executed by law enforcement. I've seen body cam footage. And me, a regular person, I don't have a gun. I don't feel like that person was a danger. I feel like that person could have been talked down. That person could have been maneuvered or whatever. His life did not have to be taken. And I think there is a sanctity of life that is really missing from these policies and these conversations about policy. And the fact that, the lobbyist gets on there and says, well, 19 people died and only 4 of them are Black. So, Black lives don't matter, or your point is moot. I think that, that just that speaks volumes. That shows that the sanctity of life is not upheld in law enforcement, and there is no accountability. And so you will never bridge a gap with community if you can kill us with impunity. And that just rhymed. So I didn't mean to rhyme that, but it just came out that way.
Rapper.
But you cannot bridge a gap with us when you're killing us and nothing happens over and over and over again. So I think for me, police accountability is crucial. Obviously, DA Wolfson has never held an officer accountable for the murder of a civilian. And, he's held them accountable for other things, but he's never held them accountable for taking someone's life. And especially now where you have Jorge Gomez, who was just killed, in June of 2020. And, on camera, he's running away and he was shot 19 times. So, instead of just saying we made a mistake, there was another shooting that happened and we thought he had something to do with it and we were wrong. They're having a fact-finding review, bringing up his text messages, bringing up things that were irrelevant because the officers weren't aware of those things at the time that they took his life. So I think, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about educating the community. We really have to start refusing these narratives. We have to start refusing their definition of public safety. We have to start refusing their definition of justice, because that is not justice for us. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing that I would say out of the DA's office is that, and it's kind of related to what I just said about like defining these things for ourselves. When we were in the hearing for the death penalty, Steve Wolfson did a whole ass presentation about, you know, why we can't abolish the death penalty. And one, that is a perfect example of systemic racism. When you have a white man who is representing the district attorney's office, lobbying for a bill to lobbying against a bill to end to abolish the death penalty, and that bill has to also go through the same chambers that are run by district attorneys. So yeah, he doesn't have a direct line to say don't do this or don't do that, but you think that they don't listen to him? The same person who they work for on a daily basis? So that right there is systemic racism. So that should be addressed. And then also, in terms of, and this came up in the death penalty hearings, you have, again, and it goes back to what I said about justice. Who are you seeking justice for? Mm-hmm. We have numerous people in our community. I have lots of people within my base that have all been victimized at some point. I have a mom whose son was murdered. She was on that call in support of ending the death penalty. Why? Because we know that that's actually not a fix. The DAs got on, John Jones, Steve Wolfson, Jennifer Noble, all these people getting on these calls talking about all these heinous, really disturbing cases. And yet the death penalty is on the books right now. That didn't deter that from happening. So stop acting like the death penalty is not a deterrent and just call it what it is. It's retribution. And I think that, Steve Wolfson made a really interesting point to me. He was asked, will you still pursue the death penalty even if the family of the victim does not support that? And he said, yes. He said he still has to do it for the community. For what community? We didn't ask for that. So again, it's like, who are you seeking justice for? And who is defining justice? And that's why I said we have to start defining justice for ourselves, because the mother of someone who was murdered was on the actual presentation for the death penalty saying all that money, that $400,000 that you spent to resolve a death penalty case, you could have spent that on me and my family for therapy, for replacing income of a breadwinner that was lost. She said it out of her own mouth, all of the ways in which they could have actually reinvested that money back into the family to restore them. But no, they think they're like, she's telling you what justice is, but you're not listening because you have it in your mind that justice is killing someone. Yeah. So again, it's a matter of really like flipping these terms and refusing just the entire narrative that we've been told our entire lives, and really thinking deeply about what is justice. Justice is healing. Justice is restoration. Justice is addressing the root cause and making sure that this doesn't happen again in the future. So it's like all of these, heinous scenarios that they're giving, you did nothing to prevent that from happening again in the future. So again, I guess that would be, my things at the DA's office, the culture at the DA's office really needs to address.
Sure. In preparation for this conversation today, I was doing some research around what cities, what localities have been able to defund or repurpose their police department. And I didn't get to dig very deep, but I did come across the city of Ithaca, New York. They have repurposed their police department, and it is now called the Department of Community Solutions and Public Safety. And from what I read, and I didn't get very deep, so if somebody out there in the universe is like, nah, they still doing it wrong, it would just seem as though there's a collaborative effort in trying to understand with community what public safety means, what justice is, how to show up better for community to create the trust that's necessary in order to beget safety. Because safety, I don't feel safe when I hear sirens. I don't stay too far from the convention center, and I tell my partner all the time, I'm so tired of the sirens. I'm glad that they're there, right? Because obviously, I guess someone needs help. I live across the street from a fire department. But hearing sirens triggers me. I get a pit in my stomach every time I hear a siren. And heaven forbid a cop pull up behind me, because the events of this week have just kind of brought this cloud of inevitability over me. When will my day come? So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, Leslie, about who are you seeking justice for, because you definitely are not doing it in collaboration with community. I want to ask another question that the audience posed, and I want to start with Judge Harris because you are a former public defender. How do we prevent public defenders from becoming apathetic and jaded, since they are the frontline face of the accused in dealing with the district attorney's office?
That is an extremely loaded question. I will say this. I think that one, we're all people, right? We're all people. And people have good days and people have bad days, right? That's first thing. And this is for, I think, anybody. And two, I think you just have to support them. I think they need to have support. And that is a difficult question. I think they have to have support, and you have to support them if you can, and realize that when, first and foremost, I don't believe that public defenders support home invasions or robberies or sexual assaults or homicides. They don't support these things. Let's clear that up. What they are is they are defenders of the Constitution. They are the system of checks and balances. They are making sure that what we have as a nation, our Bill of Rights, which makes us Americans, right? Because no other nation has a Bill of Rights, is protected, because there, by the grace of God, there go I. And if one person's rights are wrong, then everybody's rights could be wrong. So they're up there protecting that. And I think that to educate the public to know what their job is and what they're doing would assist in that. Because a lot of times when I was a former public defender, one of the questions we all have gotten is, well, how can you defend those people? How can you even do this type of work, right? And it's like, how could I not? Because as an American, I truly believe in the Bill of Rights and that everybody should get a fair shake. And it's parts of system of the checks and balances. As a public defender, public defenders do plead people guilty, and sometimes you do plead people guilty to prison time. Sometimes those tough conversations are had with the client of, you're probably not going to fare well in this one. We need to try to see what we can do to assist you in some type of way. So I think that support, education, knowing what a public defender actually does, supporting them, having the education out in the public, in the community, could do that. Because a lot of times public defenders do get attacked, right? They are up there as public enemy number one. A lot of times their clients don't like them because they think, oh, this free lawyer don't care about me. A lot of times the judge is annoyed with them because, oh, they're making court go longer than possible. Therefore, the court staff and the marshal don't prefer you, right? The district attorney is rolling his eyes at everything that you're saying or could be saying. So I think that there's a level of support that's needed, because they are actually the protectors of the Constitution in that sense. And I think, they are people, and the job could be a thankless job, and it gets hard and it gets worn down, because it is grunge work. It's grinding to your knuckles, So I think that that's one way that the public could support. I mean, I was a public defender for 15 years, and that's how I made it through. Because each public defender some people do it for different reasons, right? And so I had my family, my friends, my colleagues in my office, John Piro, one of my best friends, I call him my brother, just having each other's back and having that support and being able to say it's okay if you had a rough day, and but public defenders are resilient people, because they get up every morning and they do it again and again and again. Most of them work on days that they don't need to work. They work on the weekends. They work after hours if there's such thing. So I think that, and the culture and the shift is also changing within public defenders, right? Because there was a time where, and I grew up in the community in which I served, and being a public defender was not a cool thing. Okay, it was not a cool thing, because A lot of people have been harmed by public defenders. They definitely have been harmed by public defenders, or they have a family member who has been harmed by public defenders. But it goes back to that accountability, right? Saying, I know why you feel this way and you're right, and that was a wrong, but I'm here to tell you that that's not going to happen this time or anymore. And you also have to say that, because growing up in North Las Vegas, you know, they had key words for public defenders, which I will not repeat because I find them offensive. But it wasn't a cool thing. And I often had to have these conversations with my community. Even as running for judge, I had people come up to me and say, why would we elect a public defender, right? Because you don't care, you're selling people down, you're doing this. This is the culture of the public defenders, to which I had to say, you know what? Those things did happen. You are right. If you had X, Y, and Z, you probably did not get treated well. I can tell you that you are speaking truth. However, that is not the case in this situation. And so I think that we have to have those conversations and make sure it really boils down to education and support.
For sure. John, how do you push through? How do we keep public defenders from getting apathetic and giving up, throwing in the towel?
Quentin, it's working with the community, like definitely revitalizes me. Like working with Leslie Turner, getting community input, moving forward from there. And then like losing Judge Harris was one of the worst things that ever happened to me. I'm so happy that she's a judge now, but that was my best friend in the office. You know, that's somebody that I would take a lot. You can catch me anytime walking downtown, but now I'm walking by myself, trying to adjust to what happened in court, the injustices that we've seen, you know, because we have a front row seat to that. One of the things that nobody ever talks about in criminal justice reform is giving more lawyers to our office, because I used to say that we have a full caseload, but then I talked to some more attorney friends and they're like, no, you have an overflowing caseload. And that is correct. That's the best way. You have a caseload that is completely unmanageable, and any lawyer that was handling that number of cases in any other arena wouldn't be able to do so. You have an unmanageable number of cases, and you're trying to do the best you can for the people in front of you at all times. But it's a very difficult situation. But we also, when we talk about the culture that Larry Krasner confronted in the district attorney's office, there are cultures that need to be confronted within the public defender's office as well, you know? And there you have to root out apathy. And maybe that means you have to get rid of some apathetic people if they're not willing to change, you know? Because you have to have a trauma-informed care approach. You have to be willing to stand up. And I will tell you, Quentin, it has been the honor of my life to be a public defender. It has been the honor of my life to stand with the voiceless, to fight for the people that other people like to throw stones at, to catch those stones, to stand with the demonized in the hope that demonizing will stop. But you definitely have to work hard every day. You definitely have to have people around you that love you and care about you. And you have to have a love for the community. Dr. Cornel West said, justice is love in public. And that's how I view my job. Loving the community that raised me.
In public. And I would just add, I'm not a public defender and I don't even play one on TV, but I'm in this work too. And I would say that self-care and just taking time to breathe, thank yourself, give yourself 10 minutes in the morning. For me, myself, I've had to tell myself, Quentin, make it work is gonna be there, brother. Give yourself 7 minutes, close your eyes and sit still. And it really does make a difference. So everything that Judge Harris said, everything that Mr. Piro said, but also just take some time to stop and center yourself. That's very important. One of the themes that came up in our conversation, I think I'll make this our final question tonight before we get to final thoughts, is this idea of accountability. And I want everyone to chime in. I want to start with Candace because tonight we saw the first episode of the screening. And you know, the screening does what a documentary kind of does. It makes you root for the guy that's like, yeah, I'm standing up. I'm standing up for people that have been marginalized. I'm standing up for people that are overlooked. And it got me caught up, you know? So when we got on here tonight and I was speaking with Candace, and I'm like, yeah, I'm a fan. She was explaining to me how her organization has been holding Mr. Krasner accountable. I would like for you to speak to what that has looked like and what that has turned into real time right here today, because he's in the middle of a primary race this year. He's up for re-election.
Yeah, like one of the things that really got a lot of activists in Philadelphia excited when Krasner was running and why people were so behind him was his willingness to like develop this co-governance model where he wanted to be accountable to people in the movement spaces, to the community, the people on the ground who were trying to who have been working on these progressive issues for a long time, the ones that he campaigned on. And so, you know, that first was a judge accountability table, which had a membership from several different activist groups who, you know, work on different issues related to pretrial detention, incarceration, all of different areas.
Uh-oh, Candace, I think we're having some issues with your audio. Are you there, Candace? We was doing good, y'all. We have no problems. Oh, there she is.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. So yeah, just saying that that was a table where there was like conversations going around and being really accountable. Table actually helping to shape some of those initial policies that were taking place, or at least being asked their opinions on these things they're rolling out. And you know how that looks like some over 2 years later is that a lot of those things have been happening when it comes to holding police accountable, making sure that dirty police aren't on the witness stand, things like that, you know, looking at people who were like wrongly like prosecuted and incarcerated.
Uh-oh.
Out. And you know, the lines of communication lately have really broken down. And so like we don't have those tables. It got to a point where the promised reforms were just like not like just not happening, but being like really resistant to like any like input from leftist groups. And like we decided like, okay, well maybe us being at the same table isn't really helpful right now. Like we're going to like go our own ways and like work to push these things, and hopefully, you know, your office will come around, but we're also going to continue educating the public about what is really happening on the ground, what's happening with children being charged as adults, what's happening with people held on these really high bails that your office is asking for, and you know, and the ways in which that you haven't been keeping some of those core promises that you made that got you elected in the first place.
Wow. Well, that's disheartening to hear, though I can understand that reality, because it's a reality that I think if you're in the political space, you kind of see it happen frequently, as disheartening as that is. Leslie, if I can take it to you in asking, what does accountability mean for you in this work? What does successful accountability of an elected official look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to figure that out myself. You know, what is account like, because it's always like I was one of those people who kind of was hesitant about voting because it's like, yeah, I don't want to do all this, knock doors, make phone calls, and do all these things for candidates, and then when they get in office, they just forget about us. And it's like, well, if they do that, then we just hold them accountable. And it's like, okay, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean primarying them and, you know, not putting in the work for them afterwards? Because I don't even necessarily think that works, you know? So I think a major key to it is being in deep relationship with people, and it's being in real relationship with people and making sure that to the best of your ability that your values are aligned before they get in office. And I think that's why I started really just being like, I only support my folks that are running because I know that I can hold them accountable when they run for office, because it's a real relationship. It's a real, and I think that accountability has to be rooted in relationship. If you don't care about somebody, then you're not going to care whether or not they are for you or against you. You know what I'm saying? Or like, you don't need to explain yourself to them. So I think accountability, I think it has to start with relationship building. And and that's difficult because sometimes it's hard to be in relationship or build a relationship with people that you don't know, that maybe from a whole different sphere than you're from. You know what I mean? So I guess it's something that I'm still trying to figure out, but I know accountability, it's about supporting the person and also challenging them, which Candace had said in our kind of conversations we were having before this. It's like, yes, as much as I'm going to challenge you and push you, I also am going to support you as well. So I think it's both of those things. And then it's also being transparent and being open to accountability, open to those conversations, not closing off the door because now y'all asking too much, or we're not seeing eye to eye. So I think as we put our more and more of our people in office, I'm hoping that it will be reciprocal and it will get easier as it goes. But again, it's just it's going to be a learning lesson for everybody.
For sure. Now, Judge Harris, you have a unique role in this question because you are the lone elected official. So as the elected official, how has accountability shown up for you? What does that mean for you as an elected official, the importance that is?
It's very important to me. But then again, it's very important to me because I feel connected to my community. And that's all of the community. And I just want to make sure that we do have a relationship. Sure. Because I do feel like accountability is rooted in having a relationship. But I think we have to make relationships. And that's where I think sometimes the problem falls. That's where the problem comes, because we don't have the seats at the table. So we are only in relationship with like-minded people. And when you're only in relationships with people who are rooting for you or like-minded people, we're not moving forward, right? Because as I said before, perception is reality and we all have a different perception. And so I do feel like you have to have those relationships to be able to hold somebody accountable. But it starts with the baby steps. And so I think that that's what happens for me. As I can say, being an elected official, before you run, people always tell you it can get lonely. And I can see why it could get lonely, because you are sometimes the only one that's the elected official trying to convince your colleagues of different things when your perception or your thoughts are a little bit different. But then there are times when you have that other person that's like, okay, I want to follow up with this conversation and have a coffee. And from that coffee, you can start building that relationship where then you can have some sort of accountability with the different thought process. So I do think it is relationships, but I do think that the problem is that, and I know Piro will say it with his quote that he has, is that relationships aren't built overnight. They're not built in 6 months. They're not built in 9 months. They're not built in a year. And I think sometimes people think elected officials, although they do hit the ground running, you also have to give them a little bit of time. I tell people all the time, I've been in my new job less than 6 months. I've literally had to tell people sometimes, you got to give me a moment. I'm still learning my job. I'm still getting acclimated to my new position. Of course, I want to do these things. I have to learn my job to make sure that what you want and what I want and what's needed is going to happen correctly, right? And then I also think that with elected officials is something that I've noticed is that sometimes they don't go to other elected officials. And I don't know if that's a pride thing or if because there's no relation, but I just so happen to know some really cool elected officials who are in my same position, who I can call on day and or night, who will take my calls, pick up the phone, listen to me, and assist and help me. And I'm grateful, but that is because I have built real relationships, right? And so that's where accountability, I think, comes from. But I think we have to realize that it's not something that happens overnight with these electeds, and that you do have to build a relationship. And while we would want it to be super fast, it's just not going to be, because that's not what happens. You know, I tell people all the time, if your friend came over to game night with a guy or a female or another person, and they said, this is who I'm dating, you'd be like, okay, great. On Sunday, if they told you they were marrying that person,
I'm scratching my head a little bit.
everybody would be like, well, didn't you just meet him on Thursday? We had game night on Saturday and now y'all married on Sunday. It would be the talk of the town, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so everybody would be scratching their head and looking. And so I think that's the same thing with being an elected official. While you want this person to do something, you want them to move quickly, you know, it just doesn't happen like that. And if it did, you would be scratching your head a little bit, right? Because nobody wants a yes, ma'am. And we have to have those conversations. And then just remember, it's one of those things where we can agree to disagree. There are times I have conversations, even with John Piro, where I'm like, okay, well, we're agreeing to disagree. I'm not doing that, or maybe he's not doing what I want him to do, but that's fine. And then you can't also just remember that elected officials are people too, right? So if you can't agree to disagree, and then it starts with the, well, we'll unelect you, well, then you get a person like me, and it's like, bring it. Right? Because you have to realize that it also boils down to that, and that's not how relationships really work. So, and I think you have to make those real relationships to be able to hold people accountable in that sense.
For sure. Leslie, go ahead and jump in real quick.
Okay, yeah, let me jump in. A couple of things I wanted to say is, one, and maybe not so much in your role, Judge Harris, as as a judge, but I mean, I guess that's debatable. But I mean, generally speaking, and in terms of especially like the legislature, like y'all are supposed to be representing the will of the people who voted you into office. So you're not up there to like do your own thing or do the bidding of police unions or do the bidding of the casinos industry or do the bidding of, anybody who put, hundreds of thousands of dollars into your campaign. You are supposed to be representing the will, and you're supposed to be a conduit of what the people want. And so in that sense, I don't, it's like, no, we can't agree to disagree. You need to do the will of the people because that is what you are there for. And if you don't want to do that, then yeah, we ain't voting for you next time. And you can get unelected, you can get unseated, and you can, go do whatever it is that you want to do, because that to me is like you're using us to put you into power. But then once you have that power, you disregard what the people want and the whole reason why we put you in office in the first place. So, and that perspective varies, because, different offices, they have different positionality as far as like the community part. But I'm in particular with legislators, it's like, why are you there if you're not there to represent the people's will, So, and then also the other part of that is like, when people's lives are on the line, it's not something I can really be like, well, we can agree to disagree, because like, no, this is, if something that's rooted in my right to exist as a Black person, or my right to live in this country as an undocumented person, or my right to walk down the street and not be killed by law enforcement, then that's not something we could just be like, yes, cool, we could disagree on. And so I just wanted to like give that context as well.
And I would just add that in addition to it using us, it also manipulates our passion. And it also manipulates our lived experiences that drive our passion for justice in all these other areas. Mr. Langford, I'll come to you and ask about the role of accountability for community in holding elected officials accountable.
So I'd like to point to an interesting phenomenon, which is that, when they take polls of legislative bodies nationally, locally, people hate legislators. They just do. They don't hate their legislator. Their legislator's a good person. That person that represents them, man, they're the greatest. They always take my call. That whole group of them though, they're awful. Okay, that's what everybody means when they're talking about relationships. And if you have a relationship with that particular legislator or DA or whomever, you may get a different feeling, a different vibe every time you hear something positive or negative. The other thing that I will say is that the problem with politicians in our form of democracy is that they have to be elected. And that creates some behavior. First, when they're running for office, there's a tendency to promise the sun and the moon. Then when they're elected and they can't even deliver an asteroid, falling on a barn somewhere, they shut up, they stop having relationships, and they stop communicating. Everybody talks about transparency and uses transparency like it's some panacea. Transparency is nothing unless you're communicating. You can have the most open office in the world. Here's our statistics. Here's what we're doing. But unless people understand why you're doing some things and why decisions have been made the way they've been made, everything falls apart. And that's not true transparency. So you can look in the window all you want, and the window may be really clear, but if you can't hear what's going on inside, then you don't really know what's happening, right? And so I think that politicians tend to overpromise and underdeliver, particularly as a body and as individuals. And so I think it is up to agencies, grassroots agencies who are willing to speak truth to power and say, what's going on here, and willing to say, as Leslie said, there comes a point where we're just not going to support you anymore. And if that means that the ogre under the bridge becomes our next legislator, well, so be it. It's better than being lied to over and over and having our requests ignored over and over.
For sure. Mr. Piro, I'll throw the last portion of this question to you.
I think, Quentin, like Leslie and Judge Harris said, it boils down to relationships. And there's a formula that I like to use in my own relationship that I think translates to what we need. And it's time plus truth equals trust. And that's an investment in time in the other person. And that's truth. You're telling the truth even when it's hard, even if you have to get uncomfortable. I think a lot of people get into the work, maybe DAs and even public defenders, and you think you're going to be some hero and that you're going to run out to the margins of society and you're going to change the margins of society. But really, that's a bad concept to have. You shouldn't go to the margins because you think you're going to change the people there. You should go there to be changed by them. It changes you. The problem with our world right now, Quentin, to steal Mother Teresa's words, is that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And if kinship was really our goal, we wouldn't be fighting so hard for justice. We'd be celebrating it right now with each other. Yeah. And so the goal is kinship, but you have to have truth. You have to be honest. You have to have hard conversations. You have to be able to take criticism. And you have to be able to say that the way we've been doing things, the way we've always done things, that's not okay anymore. And it's time to change it. And if you can't say that, then get out of the way and let other people change it.
Right, say that. Thank you for sharing those remarks. I'm going to give some space for folks to give any final thoughts. And I would like to start with Candace. Final thoughts on our conversation this evening, anything that you would add to our conversation tonight?
Yeah, I don't know what I have to add. I feel like we covered a lot of ground and different nuances, and I especially like how the conversation about accountability of politicians grew. And I would say that we didn't go into a lot of detail, but I feel like maybe people see this as more a documentary unfurls. I'm not sure how much detail it goes into, but what we're seeing now in Philadelphia, I just think it's a real learning opportunity, especially as this progressive prosecutor movement has grown across the nation. It was just like really needing to take time to look back and really interrogate to see, is this actually a tactic that's working for us? What's the dangers of using this tactic? And what do we do going forward? Because again, it was something that sparked a lot of hope in Philly and a lot of energy, which was really needed. And it was great, but then again, perhaps had too many hopes riding on it for it actually to be able to deliver what we needed, because what we're looking to is electing a person to be part of the system that needs to be fundamentally changed and many of us think dismantled. So how is that really going to result in the great sort of fundamental turnarounds that we wanted to see, when it's just basically replacing one actor in a really vile system.
Mhm. Judge Harris, any final thoughts to add to the evening?
I just would say it was an honor to be on this panel, to have this opportunity. And I just want everybody to remember we need to have those relationships, and that we all have to get uncomfortable, and uncomfortable in everything that we do, in our routines, and be able to look through another person's lens and get a different perspective. We all have to get uncomfortable. And that's including myself. And you guys are calling me Judge Harris. And last year in 2020 was extremely uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
And I'm still a little uncomfortable. And I'm okay with that, because I'm growing as a person and I'm moving forward. And that's where we need to be as a society, is moving forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. Leslie, any final thoughts, my friend?
I guess first, just thank you. This was a really dynamic conversation. I think that needs to be had. I really like what Candace said about the lessons of kind of like putting players into the system and like instilling so much hope in them, and then they don't deliver, and it's like, where does that leave us as a community? I think that's really something that we need to reflect on. I think that there's more lessons there to dissect, especially from an organizing perspective. And it's kind of like, because this is a nationwide tactic that was used, so I think it's good for us to go back and like, debrief and talk about what worked, what didn't work, and what are we going to do next. So I really want to end on that note, and also just to say that this is going to be an ongoing conversation on the Mass Lit Project page, and hopefully, Quentin, you can continue to host us, because you're such an amazing moderator, and you really like literally you just pluck the questions out of us like from our conversation. So I think that was just like really dope. But we're going to continue this conversation. We want to bring in some more organizers on the ground that that have like a firsthand perspective on kind of like what's happening now, how they got there, having that conversation, especially as we prep and build momentum going into next year and hopefully unseating the current DA. So there's a lot to be dug into, and I'm just here for it. And I'm just also just really grateful, the folks on this call, like Robert, I don't even know if like what you were talking about is abolition. John, what you were talking about is abolition. And I think that's where we need to be headed. We need to be figuring out how we dismantle the system entirely and invest in actual solutions that are rooted in healing and rooted in preventing these things from continuing to happen generation after generation after generation. So thank you. And BTH, Belinda, thanks for just, always being accessible, always allowing yourself to be accountable to the community. We need more folks like you in office. So thank you.
Mr. Piro, can you give us your final thoughts for tonight?
Thanks, Quentin. I just want to thank you, and I want to thank PBS for hosting us and showing this documentary, because I think it's an important documentary for a movement in time right now. I think as our conversation has illuminated, especially with Candace's perspective, that a forward-thinking prosecutor is just a Band-Aid on a broken problem right now.
Yeah.
It's one aspect of it. And don't get me wrong, we need that Band-Aid. But like Leslie said, we also need change in other aspects of our society. And we need to stop using the criminal justice system to try to solve all of our problems. When I hear you say that, you worry when you leave the house, and Leslie worries when she leaves the house, that it's inevitable that something bad with a police officer is going to happen to you, that breaks my heart. And it's important for me as a white person to listen to that, and to not just listen, but to be ready to take action as well and be an ally. And so kinship would be my final thought of the night. We need to obliterate the distance between us and work together. And if we do that, I think we're headed in the right direction. But if we continue to let, like we saw the Fraternal Order of Police in that documentary, or in our case, it's Brian Gramis at the Las Vegas Police Protective Organization, try to divide us into that us and them, we're never going to get far. We're never going to get far. That fear mentality and that scarcity mentality is what keeps everybody in their silos from moving forward. And we need to break out of that. There's enough here for all of us. And we don't have to keep trying to solve the problems in the same broken way that we've been trying to solve them. We can be better, we can do better. And I'm committed to that.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Langford, I'm going to let you get the final word of tonight.
Okay, so you're going to let the elderly white guy have the final word. Okay, well, I would like to end on a really positive note from my perspective. And really, as an elderly white guy who's been doing civil rights work in one form or another for 35 years, wow, it's so much better today. And I know that really sounds patronizing and crappy. Man, that is the truth. That is the truth. It's better today. And you know why it's better today? Because we have grassroots organizations that are well-funded, that are active in a variety of communities, not just criminal justice reform, but economic justice, gender justice. We have great things happening every day. And in my life, over the course of my life, I have seen so many changes. And sometimes they seem like they're not really important, what we call people. What people are able to identify, all of those things, 10 years ago, that wasn't happening, but it happens now, and it happens today, and it happens because of the good work that's being done every day by Plan, by Make the Road, by just a variety of other great groups. And I'm so happy to be a part of this little group, but I'm so happy that I live in a community that has those things going on, where we are making positive changes and we are going to get justice eventually. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a deeply honored to be part of this conversation with you all tonight. Some of the most brilliant minds that I've encountered in Las Vegas.